I'd like to welcome you to the Rules and City Government Committee. Please note for the record, Alderman Arnett and Alderman Savage, members of the committee, are here. We're being joined by Alderwoman Tierney and Alderman Gay. And I believe we have several department heads with us, Mr. Lyles, Dr. Nash, Mr. Johnson, and there may be others. I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Alderman Savage, are you interested in amending the agenda to add an item to it?
Yes, I'll amend it to add, I don't have the ordinance number on me.
Is it 0221?
Sounds right.
Yes, 0221.
Thank you, Takia.
I emailed it to you guys as well.
Okay, we'll have it to put up when we get to it. Okay.
We have some discussion though. I'm all in favor of expediting that, but I'm uncomfortable about putting something on for committee action that hasn't gotten notified, the public hasn't gotten notified in any way. I don't know who in the public would care, but I guess I do have.
Alderman, we can put it on the agenda for discussion without taking an action if that'll make you more comfortable.
Not taking action is one of our best things anyway.
Well,
that's fine.
That works for me. I wanted to have it handy in case we decided to take action early. I'm not by any means saying we need to. I just wanted an option.
Okay. So.
Okay. The agenda has been amended to add 0221. All in favor of approving the agenda as written, please say aye.
We need a second. Sorry. We need a second to amend it. Alderman Savage.
Second.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought that was the second from Alderman Arnett earlier.
I thought I did too, but.
Okay. Alderman Gay, did you want to comment on the agenda?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. Are we not having, like, for example, yesterday 0421 was referred to Rules of City Government. Is it not being on this agenda?
This is a special meeting of the Rules Committee to get to those items we didn't get to the last time. So we will have another meeting, I believe. Will we not, Ms. Green?
Yes, your regular meeting in March. And also this meeting was already published. So anything that happened last night wouldn't have been on this agenda.
Oh, okay. Awesome.
So what was referred still has to go to public hearing and then it'll go to rules. So the first Tuesday in March, it'll be on.
Awesome. Good. Thank you, guys.
Okay. So the agenda has been approved. The next item is approval of the minutes from the February 2nd meeting.
Move approval of the minutes.
Second that motion.
Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Okay, and so first legislative item on our agenda, and I made a comment earlier. I have ordered the agenda with the hope of dispatching with 046 and 051, giving ourselves more time to deal with 019. So thus, the order as written.
Yep.
So 046, whose legislation is 046?
Ellie's.
Fine.
Alderwoman Tierney, do you want to speak to this?
Yes. This was, it came to us and then was sent back because of the regulation issue. It is a sort of a cleanup in aisle 3 of Title 10 because the existing code had a lot of language that it was the county's responsibility, which was food, health, safety. So that was just all crossed off. That was part of the cleanup. And then the biggest substance of this is the trash removal and put out on for businesses, and we needed to re-regulate that. And the first issuance of this had the regulations intended to be under separate cover, if you will, and this legislation has been revised to incorporate. Well, with the amendment, it incorporates the regulations. There was also language about the polystyrene responsibility, and that was amended, and Alderman Savage can speak to that as well. It's, I'm good with this if Director Johnson is good with this, being Director of Public Works. And in this case, I thought the regulations were necessary in the code because they were before, and the restaurants on Main Street do look at the code, if you can believe it. So on this one, so that's it. If Sally wants to speak to any of the revisions.
Dr. Nash or Mr. Johnson, would either of you, we haven't heard what the changes specifically are. I'm looking at change on page 7, page 8. Can you speak to any of these changes? I think we understand what's been deleted, but I'm looking at what is in capitals, what's being added.
Okay, it's mostly just clarifying trash pickup regulations. I worked with Public Works, Mike Johnson and Cindy Tate to make sure we got the language right, and made it so it could be flexible enough that if there's some particular unusual situation, we won't have to do enforcement action if a trash can is left out an hour too late or something like that. So it's Public Works is in charge of part of Title 10, but Planning and Zoning is in charge of enforcement for trash pickup, which is how it came to be a joint effort.
Yeah, may I also add that one of the reasons for this legislation is a lot of the businesses can't get in soon enough to put back their refuse container. So this gives them that 1 hour liberty.
Okay.
I'm fine with it. I don't have any issues with it.
Okay. I saw Alderman Gay's hand.
Would this extend the hours for mass complexes as well? I know we have an issue in Eastport Terrace and Harbor House where the trucks are coming too early to meet the times, and the residents nearby are asking for a later time. So would this help that as well?
Sorry, I know. So you said the trucks are coming too early. I think the garbage is supposed to be placed out the evening before. So I'm not sure because
yeah,
really.
I just thought I heard someone reference the time change.
That's for commercial properties. I'm not sure. Does the city pick up packet trash?
Well, it's on the street of the city, and I believe there has been an issue in the past. But I'll find out and just shoot you a personal.
Okay, just let us know the specific issue.
Okay, awesome.
There are specific hours, are there not? I think they can't pick up before, what, 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock? I don't remember, but I had an issue in my ward sometime in the past about it.
Yeah, and to my knowledge, they don't start the route before their designated time. But I think what happens is that people try to gauge in quotes when the truck will come, and that's a moving target. That's difficult to do. So really, the evening before is the best time to place your stuff curbside.
Okay, Alderman Savage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a few questions. I have one issue, but I'll address that later when we discuss the amendment. But for now, my one question would be, I guess two questions, but the first would be, are there any, I'm generally hesitant to adopt legislation at this point that really ends up removing large sections of our code and just kind of blanket calling for creation of regulation, just because we don't yet have a clear process in place for public or council review of those things. But in this case, you know, I know these are relatively mundane regulations, not that controversial, at least not in my ward. I don't receive too many complaints about garbage and refuse or even the restaurant food safety, which I know is handled by the county. But you know, are there any? I guess this question would be towards the Alderwoman Tierney, but also I guess the colleagues, if there are any other minimums you want kept in the code related to the trash collection. So that's my first, I guess, question.
Yes, understood. And we added the regulations back because I had the same issue not having the regulations stated in the code. So amendments 1 through 4 add the respective, what I think you're looking for, regulations back, meaning time of pickup, et cetera.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And the other question, I guess, is for Director Johnson. Are there any change, and for the sponsor, but are there any changes to the recycling program that we should be aware of?
There are no changes to the recycling program.
In the legislation. Does this affect that at all?
I don't believe so. I think that the change largely had to do with the commercial collections, and it didn't really affect residential collection of recycling.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so if there are no further questions about the original legislation, let's go to the amendments. We have amendments 1 through 4, Tierney and Buckley. Alderwoman, do you want to speak to your amendments?
Yeah, the first one is, actually, I'm not sure. Maybe Gavin knows what the first one is. I think it's a wordsmith. Sorry about that. I'm sorry. Number 2 is stating the specifics, which was the intention of the legislation. Approved refuse containers shall be placed curbside by 6 a.m. on the scheduled collection day. Residents shall place materials to be collected, blah, blah, blah. Approved, I don't know if you can read it on your own, but and the big thing is approved refuse containers shall be removed from the sidewalk no later than 12 a.m. following the scheduled collection day.
Could we go back to the First Amendment?
Yeah.
I'm just looking at that right now. Looks like it strikes.
It's similar to the other 3 amendments. It strikes out in accordance with the rules, with the regulations promulgated by the Department of Public Works. Till we get that all sorted out, I think Alderwoman Tierney, as a courtesy, has stricken all of these things that delegates the regulation power in code, which is what Title II currently calls for.
Oh,
and
right.
She's striking it out.
Thank you, Ross.
I'm in agreement with all 4 regulations, and thank you for offering them.
Right. I'm sorry about number 1. That's what it does. It corresponds that language to meet incorporating the regulations back in. And then 3 addresses the commercial part of it, the commercial businesses. This goes back to my predecessor, Alderman Budge, specifically in the historic district, focusing on making sure that when people are eating, restaurants, that they don't, when people come downtown, they don't see trash bins during the dining hours, and then also when we have parades and stuff. So it ensures that the bins, et cetera, are pulled back in, so that everything's kind of cleaned up by 9 a.m. And that's specific in the second paragraph of Amendment 3. And then Amendment 4 makes the respective strikeouts. to incorporate this regulation.
So, Madam Chair, I would move that we recommend favorably on amendments 1 through 4.
I will second that motion.
Second. I'd like to ask both Dr. Nash and Mr. Johnson to react to these amendments.
They are fine with me. They're fine with me.
Mm-hmm. I know this is probably more public works than.
I don't have any concerns with the amendments. They're fine.
Okay. All right. Further discussion on amendments 1 through 4? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. And that takes us to Amendment 5, the Savage Amendment. Alderman Savage?
Yes. So on this affects 2 pages, pages 1 and page 7. What it did is simply remove, basically, so what the legislation currently states that, quote, reassigning certain enforcement powers to the deputy city manager for resilience and sustainability. And we were informed by the law office that office, and by I think the deputy city manager herself, that position doesn't have, or office doesn't have, any enforcement capabilities under the code. And I also was just concerned about giving further enforcement powers to that office in general, just given the responsibilities that we put in the charter amendment governing that position. I think it'd be more appropriate to reside somewhere in the Department of Public Works or even code enforcement. But I know Public Works has an environmental compliance inspector, which I think may be able to take on these responsibilities associated with this. Or I think the Public Works may already have, if you're just talking about the refuse collection, they already have, I think, somebody who deals with that. And in terms of the food, that, or in this case, I guess the specific enforcement capability had to do with the foam ban. And so that is something that is handled by the county Department of Health. When they do their inspections, they're also looking at the foam ban. And I believe the process is they end up notifying the city if they find any violations. And then the city just needs to send out an inspector and write the citation. And so it's not a huge workload, I imagine. I'm not sure if any of the staff members know how many enforcement cases we've had to take for the foam ban, but it just seemed to me it'd be more appropriate to reside in Public Works somewhere.
Mr. Johnson, is that currently in your wheelhouse? Do you have someone whose responsibility that is now?
A lot of the enforcement is handled through code, but we do have a staff person who is responsible for monitoring and administering the collection contract, and they can work with code to get someone cited if needed, if they can get compliance some other way.
Okay.
So it being placed in Public Works is not a great burden on us. It can work. We can make it work.
Okay, so we're talking about removing the language on page 1 and on page 7. Same language. Alderman, is that your motion?
Yeah, page 7 says the deputy city manager shall have the power to enforce the provisions of this section through issuance of municipal citations. So yeah, that would just be changed to the Director of Public Works or designee.
I second that motion.
Okay. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the Savage Amendment, please say aye. Aye.
Aye. Oh, I see a hand, Madam Chair.
I'm sorry, Ms. Green?
So the amendment, did you just amend the amendment?
No.
That's
No,
what
that
your
was
amendment says.
It was Amendment 5 we were moving.
Okay.
Okay. So that's all the amendments. If there are no other amendments, then I'll entertain a motion to give a recommendation of 04620 as amended.
So move.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. Further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you for doing this first, Alderman Finlayson. Thank you very much. Even though I'm going to stay on.
Well, please do. You're welcome to participate further. Okay, the next item, let's see, I get rid of all of 46. The next item is 05120, Emancipation Day. And I think that's Alderman Schandelmeyer's legislation. Any other sponsors? I'm not seeing any.
Looks like you're a sponsor.
Well, actually, I guess I'm a sponsor. In a nutshell, it's adding another celebratory day in our city list of holidays that we observe. And the request is adding Emancipation Day for November 1st each year. With the understanding that, you know, these days are all negotiated items. So this is just pretty much enabling legislation. So can I get a motion? Alderman Savage, is your hand up?
What kind of motion?
Whatever kind of motion you'd like to make.
I mean, I'd like it on the floor. I'm not entirely sure where I stand yet, but I'd like to move it forward for action.
Second.
Well, I don't know what that means, move it forward. Are you supporting, making a motion to support 051, or we're having a discussion, so there's not a motion, it's necessary to have a discussion.
Okay, yeah, can we just have more discussion first then?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. John, can I just jump? Okay, thank you. Yeah, I absolutely support this in concept. And at first I had a lot of concern just after looking at the fiscal impact statement, but that's been, the impact note, that's been updated, and it has two numbers in it. The one is the cost for the essential workers that have to work on the holiday, which is $11,400. And then the rest of the potential impact, fiscal impact, is $216,000 due to the loss of productive work as it's stated in the fiscal note. I'm more concerned about the $11,400. I mean, just, you know, to back up a little bit, just given the budget and where we are, I'm really cautious about any kind of anything with the fiscal impact. But when I found out it was only $11,400 for the fiscal impact, I had a lot less concern about it. I do think this $216,000, which is the the loss of productivity. To be honest, I'm not as concerned with that, because I don't think that really is going to have a direct impact on the budget and whether or not it's balanced. And I don't think it has an impact on our expenses or revenues, because, you know, I mean, and I think if there's staff here who can speak to this, but I don't think it's going to prevent us from getting fees or other revenue. It might just delay that a day when the staff is back to work. But if I'm wrong, I definitely want to be corrected by staff or my colleagues. So with that said, I'm a lot more friendly to it with just the $11,400 impact. But if that's a concern, we could always look at swapping out another holiday to have this in place, because as you said, Madam Chair, I think this is negotiated for the union. So I don't know if we can even do this. I guess that's another question. Can we even do this outside the negotiating window? Because we have another, 3 years on the contract?
I think this would be only enabling legislation, which would allow them to put it on the table in the bargaining.
Okay.
I'm not sure I understand what you mean by enabling legislation, but I don't agree with Alderman Savage. I think the total impact is the $250,000. This is a day where we do not have employees reporting to work. It's the 12th day where staff would not be reporting to work, and therefore it is a $250,000 fiscal impact. This was discussed at length at my town hall, not at length, and I did hear some sentiment from some constituents about trading a holiday. I also heard from the sponsor some sense of making it a day of celebration, and also heard sentiment from some constituents about, instead of a day off, truly making it a day of celebration where we have different kinds of activities in the city that discuss and highlight the meaning of Emancipation Day rather than making it a paid holiday. So I think the fiscal impact here is real, and I think that it's not something that we can afford to do, particularly in our current budget circumstances, but I don't think we really can afford to add more holidays, period, of any kind. So I'm not inclined to support this, whether it's enabling legislation, and that's not what it reads. It says, for the purpose of designating Emancipation Day as a city holiday to be observed on November 1st. It's not saying it's enabling, it's designating it as a paid holiday.
Well, I could be.
Quick, go ahead.
I could be wrong, but I believe that all or many of these holidays have been negotiated. And that means there has been some give and take in order to get all of these holidays as paid days. Veterans Day, Memorial Day, all of them, well, that aren't national holidays, Good Friday. And so I think, and like I said, I could be wrong, that this does not automatically make it a holiday. Okay.
But it automatically takes it out of our hands since we have no role whatsoever in negotiations.
Well,
we
that's
just
not
simply approve whatever the administration negotiates.
Well, that's not entirely true at all, Alderman Arnett. Because
I think it is true.
Well,
we don't have a role.
We do not have a specific role, but we have representation at the bargaining table. Okay, the direction that is taken by the administration is supposed to come through us. And whether it happens that way or not, and it has in the past, because you and I were part of that process. So we can't say it doesn't happen, because it does. But you're right, we don't have any direct say. Director Gerald or City Manager Gerald last year attempted to bring things to us, I think a little prematurely, which got things off on a bad foot. But yeah, we do have some input, maybe not as much as we'd like to have. But we don't, I know we may feel like we're rubber stamping stuff, but it's a little more than that.
But it is your use of the word enabling that really gives me trouble, because that is saying if the council passes this, it's okay.
I have a very quick request, Madam Chair, just before we get too far along, can we get somebody from the finance department to help address the fiscal impact?
Well, we can, Takia or Ms. Green, would you reach someone in finance? I see Mr. Lyles has joined us. Mr. Lyles, can you speak to this legislation and whether it is enabling legislation, or would it be mandatory that the unions would have to accept this as an additional holiday?
The unions don't have to take a day off if they don't want one, but everybody else in the employee would have to will have a day off where it is paid. The current impact, if the unions accept the holiday, would be, as the fiscal impact note suggests, about $277,000. So you have to consider that in the budget discussions coming up for June, because you have to plug that $270,000 hole. Additionally, depending on what happens with labor negotiations here and next year, there could be other impacts on the budget, as you are well aware.
Mm-hmm.
Due to COVID.
Thank you. I was seeing if Ms. Green is able to get someone from finance. The way I'm reading this fiscal impact note is that it is work hours, and I know work hours have a dollar value.
No, what the note says is the government will be paying for people to stay home on that day. $207,400 if the unions accept it, which is another few hundred employees. But you've got non-represented who would apply immediately, despite the labor negotiation. The labor unions would probably negotiate a side agreement that would take advantage of the holiday as well.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's the correct reading of that. But,
Alderman Gay?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Just quickly, one, I'd like to be added as a co-sponsor. And two, to the point that I think you made earlier, as well as Ross, maybe echoing his constituent, due to the fiscal impact and the concerns due to COVID-19, would it be unreasonable to remove a paid holiday like Christopher Columbus Day in exchange for Emancipation Day?
There's no telling. And I think if City Manager Gerald was on, he might be able to help us with, what's going on in bargaining. But in my mind, that would be something they could bargain. If we decided we would approve this holiday if it's cost neutral, okay, which means they could swap it out one for another holiday.
I thought we changed Christopher Columbus to, I'm not even seeing that on the list, but I thought it was changed to Indigenous People Day.
It's not an official holiday. It's Columbus Day.
It's not a city
recognized.
Okay. So at the Civic Association meeting, one of the things, and given my preference to have separation of church and state, there was some sentiment for swapping Good Friday. Now, you're trying on religious stuff here that I guess I'm not all that thrilled about jumping into, but of these holidays, that's the one that, of course, you could say Christmas is a religious holiday too, although I think it's more of a consumer holiday than a religious anymore. But I certainly would be sympathetic to the idea of swapping a holiday. I would be even more sympathetic to treating it like Indigenous People Day, which is a day of celebration, but not a paid day off. But I cannot sanction the fiscal impact of this. And as City Attorney Lyles points out, the unions, I cannot believe unions wouldn't accept another day, but this gives everybody who's not in the bargaining unit immediately a paid day off.
Alderman Savage?
Yeah, I'd be supportive of swapping out Good Friday for this holiday, and we could still have Good Friday be a recognized holiday, just not an official day off. If that would bring on some more support behind this, but again, with the fiscal impact, before I get to that, for Mr. City Attorney, I would ask that you maybe read that again, because the fiscal note, because the way I'm reading it says, it says, in addition to the loss of productive work hours, which are valued at approximately 216,000. So that's loss of productive work hours. And then it says the city will incur approximately $11,400 of additional costs for the essential workers who have to work on the holidays. So that $11,400 is the paying those essential workers to work. The 216 is just, and that's where I think we need more information about what that estimate is, because Alderman Arnett, with all due respect, I don't think it can be assumed that this is going to have a true impact on our expenses or revenue in the budget. We just don't have, and I guess I'm at fault too, because I'm assuming it's not going to, but I guess we don't really have that information, because the way I'm understanding it is just an estimate based on the value of work for a day, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to impact our revenue for expenses.
Yeah, it's not written very clear, but that's exactly what it's doing. We are paying for people to stay home. Additionally, there are people who are in unions who have to work, and if they have to work, they'll work at time and a half or double time for holidays. So that's the additional impact. So you're paying them the regular salary plus which they would be working anyway, but you're paying that bonus. I think it's either time and a half or double time for working on a paid holiday, like you would on a Sunday, right?
Okay.
Except Sundays aren't paid. I think paid holidays and weekends are treated differently, but it depends on the
it's a union pay in the bargaining unit. I haven't read the paragraph, but it's a bonus on top of what you're already paid.
Right.
So that's why that 11,400 is there.
Alderwoman Tierney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I would just caution that fiscal statement has to be correct. People are looking at that and they're multiplying 227,400 times, assuming that total our staff is worth $83 million in our budget. That's, they're doing simple math and they're saying, what is that? That came up at Ross's town hall. Somebody asked the question, is that how much our staff costs per diem? So I'm just a little bit cautious about clarifying that perhaps, so that a question like that doesn't come up.
It's about that much.
Mm-hmm.
It's about that much.
Well, then if you're okay with that, then that's good, because it's public.
It's about that much.
It is about that much, 83 million.
You've got about three, and you've got 3 other holidays that month. Or 2 other, Veterans Day and Thanksgiving. So you're putting another day off in November.
Alderman Savage.
Well, I guess I do have a motion now. I'd like to just move to postpone, because I feel like we don't have enough information from the finance department, enough details to, at least personally, for me to really be able to answer this financial question. Because if it is 227,000, that's going to impact our budget. I'm not going to be able to support it unless we swap out holidays.
Okay, there's been a motion to postpone action on 05120. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor of postponing, please say aye.
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 Okay, thank you very much. We'll bring that back. Ms. Green, would you make sure we have Ms. Dickinson in the meeting when we address this again, as well as Director Gerald? City Manager Gerald. Okay.
That does total, in terms of the budget, $47+ million, which is pretty close to, I think, with the compensation. This is just hours. It's not benefits or any other fringe benefits. So I think that the calculation wasn't 84 million, but it is 47 plus million.
Okay, well, we'll have the finance department bring us those numbers back for our next meeting.
Can I just add, I didn't want to doubt Katie Connolly's fiscal analysis. I just want to make sure that everyone's aware that it's public out there. So Katie does a great job.
Thank you. Okay, going on to 1919, adequate public facilities, auto transportation facilities. Let's see.
I move we adjourn.
I think we got through the first 4 amendments. Did you say you were withdrawing it?
No, I said I move we adjourn. Yes, we got through
Either one would work.
First 3.
I'm going to make some tea.
Ms. Green?
You got through the first 3.
Oh, we only got through 3. Great,
right.
Thank you.
So after a long discussion on page 1, we agreed to insert the word adequate auto transit facilities. I think we agreed to insert the definition of what auto transportation refers to, which is all vehicular traffic on roadways. And I believe we also passed including input from adjacent communities and applicable neighborhood jurisdictions where appropriate.
Ms. Green just told us that we approved amendments 1, 2, and 3. So we are on 4. And that's where we ended our discussion between 250 and 50.
So, Madam Chair, at the last meeting, you had indicated a preference to work from the red line, which is the last of 3 documents that I provided. The first document was a clean version of the ordinance as submitted on second reader on June 22nd. The second document was the amendments 1 through 14, and the third document was the amendments included in red line. Which do you want to work with?
I am working on, and I don't know which one, it's the red line version.
Okay.
And this one does have numbers, line numbers.
Yes. So we were.
That's what I'm working on.
I believe we were discussing on page 2, line 32, and we were having a dialogue with Dr. Nash about the right number. I had proposed dropping from 200 to 50, and I think where we broke off was after getting some information from Dr. Nash about the size of a community that this would include. I was talking about moving that number from 50 up to 150. So amending my amendment.
Well, where did the 250 come from? It was 400.
250 is in current code. 400 was the number before we had the amendments by Alderman Pfeiffer and Lippman back in 2016.
Okay, then the document that I'm looking at is the red line document.
Right.
On page 2, line 27, in red, it says 250, which would suggest that that's new language.
No.
So you're telling me it's not new language?
I'm not. I don't think you're looking at the right document. You should have a document that at the top of page 1 says Ordinance 1919 as amended on second reader 6/22/20, and then in bold and in red with amendments 1 through 14. I think you're looking at the old red line.
No, I am looking at the one you just cited.
Well, the document that I'm looking at has 50
on our agenda, which is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let me pull it up again. I've got like 20 documents open with the same thing. Okay, I am closing all of these documents. Now, if you would kindly tell me which one of these that are listed is the one we're supposed to, and I'm looking at the original.
Are you looking in iLegislate?
I'm looking at the agenda. And there are 9 documents attached, starting with first reader PDF. Would you tell me which one of these documents we're supposed to be looking at?
The last one, I think.
I assume it was
the last one. And that's the one that when you go to page 2 on line 32, you will see the number 50, which is the number that I had proposed as Amendment 4.
Okay, so can I assume that amendments 1, 2, and 3 are on the bottom of page 1 and top of page 2?
That is
and
correct.
Now we're on amendment 4, which is on line 32.
That's
okay.
Correct.
Okay.
So 50 is the number I proposed. We listened to a discussion from Dr. Nash about the number of traffic impact studies that would generate, which could be numerous, but also I was trying to get a sense of a number that would get us to a community size, new community size, that would generate trip studies. And the number that Dr. Nash came up with some data she pulled up was that 150 would meet that target. So dropping from 250 to 150 would produce less traffic impact studies, but would include studies of any community that would be approximately 40 new units, new residential units. And Dr. Nash, please correct me if I didn't characterize that properly.
That is for, I looked at the report for Central Park, but I know that if Dr. Dewa's on the line, he's prepared some additional information.
Dr. Dewa, could you join us? I see he's here, but I don't see him.
Yeah, I'm here.
Welcome. We're on amendment number 4, page 2, line 32. And the question is the number, what the number should be. 50, 150, 250, 400.
Okay. Sorry, did you share the tables that I sent to you with the committee? Or if you can put it on,
I can send it to Takia.
A context in terms of the size of proposed development in the city. I did, just based upon the current trip generation manual, the 10th edition, looking at residential developments, single family, multi-family, low level, that is up to, I believe, 2 stories. And multi-family, basically, multi-family could be an apartment, townhouses, condominiums, from 3 up to 10 stories. And in that table, I don't have it readily with me. I thought Sally was going to distribute, share with you, if she can. It gives us a context of, if you are thinking of X number of trips, how many residential units are we thinking about? Okay, I think she's working on that to get it for us.
Dr. Nash, are you going to send it so we can put it up, or Ms. Green? Does Ms. Green have it? I'm
going to just email it to you all and to Ms. Green.
Okay. Yeah.
Can you share your screen, Dr. Nash?
Not in Zoom unless, who's running the meeting?
Ms. Green.
Julian.
They'd have to make me co-host, but I've just sent it, so.
Okay, so you sent it to all of us?
Yes.
Okay.
So what, excuse me, when you say use, is that a guidance, a national guidance, or what determines this chart?
The chart is based upon the actual trip generation rate in the ITE trip generation manual. So they have an average rate. So the rate is not arbitrary. If you open the document, you will see there are two tabs. The first one refers to residential areas. And I have indicated the source of the trip generation rate for 3 different types of residential developments. The whole idea is that we want to discuss the threshold within a context. So when you say 10 single family units, approximately how many new vehicle trips that could generate? Or if you are thinking of commercial development in terms of office space, if you're looking at 10,000 gross square feet of office space, what does it mean in terms of trip generation characteristics? So that is the idea. Yes, I see it here. Yeah. So to help make an informed decision, I have this table, single family, multi-family, low level. And if you scroll down to the last page, I have the definitions of these 3 different residential uses. So that when you think of, say, 10 dwelling units of a single family, you are looking at about 94 new vehicle trips. Okay, so if you are thinking of what would be the threshold, what size of development, we don't want to do a much more detailed traffic impact study. This gives us a guide. And this is where either the traffic engineer or myself or Sally, when we get the size of the development, or if they have done the traffic impact study, I go in using the same rates. That is the most recent edition that we have to determine whether the number that they're using are accurate or not. So this is kind of informational item for us to basically take a look at what do you mean by, a residential development of single family units of 40 units. How many potential through that will generate? 378. And how many of them do we get in the city? So that is the whole idea with this one. If you click on the second tab, I have 2 types of commercial developments. I have, I think, what is called the general office building, which I normally see when I get the proposed development, or a small office building. The table, what it means is that typically the small office building is up to 5,000 square feet. Okay, so there is no need to calculate the trip generation for a small office building that is more than 5,000 square feet. That's why we have zeros. For the general office building is generally defined as office building with at least 5,000 or more square feet, which means that for 5,000 square feet, there is no need to do that. We will not classify that thing as a general office building, but anything beyond 5,000, yes, we do. So thinking about what is the size of development, what are the potential trip generation that it will bring in light of trying to determine the threshold, this is informational item that we can all look at and say, okay, what makes sense in the case of Annapolis to use as a threshold?
The problem with these tables is they're flipped. The dependent variable is number of units, and the dependent variable I'm looking at for is the number of trips and how many units the number of trips. So I'm having a hard time trying to convert in my mind how you would flip this, and particularly since you're really giving us five designations: single family, multifamily low-rise, multifamily high-rise, and then the two different kinds of commercial buildings. So I don't know about my colleagues, but I can't make this conversion in my mind on the fly.
Alderman, I feel just the opposite. It feels as if this is what we should be using to determine trips. If this is what transportation uses, and Dr. Duwa, am I wrong?
No, you are right. But the whole idea is that, okay, we can calculate in terms of the 150 depending upon the use. So if you take a single family residential units, your 150 may come to, let's see here, I don't have the other table on. It gives an idea, an approximate number. So this will help us make an informed decision that if you are thinking of a threshold of 150 vehicle new trips, approximately what would be the size of development that must come to Annapolis in order to meet this criteria for a fully fledged and comprehensive traffic impact study. So I'm not trying to equate your 150 to a specific size of development by land use type. That's not the idea here. It's to give you an idea, perspective that if you want this number, when it comes to residential, we're looking at X number of potentially or approximately X number of residential units for single family or for townhomes or for condominiums. So it's not to equate your 150 to a specific size of a type of development. It's informational item so that we can make a much more informed decision, as the chairwoman did indicate a few moments ago.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Alderman Savage.
Sorry, just wasn't sure if you could see me. Yeah, I mean, I do. Well, first of all, Kwaku, thank you for putting together this information. I do think it's helpful to see. And so just looking at this chart, if we go with, well, currently 250 units is roughly equivalent to maybe, 250 trips is roughly equivalent to about 27, perhaps 26, 27 dwelling units, that size of a project. And Alderwoman Finlayson, you said it was, what, 500 before, or 450? So that was...
No,
it's 400, I believe.
400 before.
It's 250 in current code now.
Yeah, I know. I'm just looking.
That wasn't his question, though. Originally, it was 400. Right. That's what I was going.
In 2016, it was 400. After 2016, it was 200.
Yeah, and I understand. And I did ask that. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm just thinking, just comparing. So when it was 400, it was roughly a project 43 units of size. And 250 is roughly 27. So 27 versus 43.
Can you tell me how you're coming up with those numbers, please, Rob? I'm not following you.
Yeah, just on the chart, and Kwaku, if I'm reading this wrong, but so for the dwelling units on the left is the size of the project, and how much and then the number to the right under single family is how much of a trip generator it is or would be. And so I get, it depends on the type of project, but so that's saying that for under the single family, if you go down to the 236, which is near 250, that's the trips generated for a project around 25 single family units in size, or it would be approximately 35 multifamily units, low rise. So that does help. And I mean, that kind of shows for a 50, if we picked 50, that'd be pretty low on the chart. That would be impacting projects that are maybe around, you know, 6 or 7 single family units in size, or about the same number of multifamily units. So yeah, that is kind of a pretty small project. I mean, I personally do think maybe we should go a little bigger, maybe around 200, which would be around the 20 unit size for single family residence, which is getting closer to, I think, a type of project that may have an impact on traffic. But in any case, yeah, I think we should stay around 250, 200 after looking at this.
So first of all, I understand now your interpolation, but remember, this is applicability, and it is a series of or clauses. You hit 1 with a minimum number of trips, or 2, it has accidents, or 3, the entrance and egress from it. So, and it sounds to, first of all, if we were really going to do this thoroughly, we probably would want to go back and introduce a table like this. And I think Dr. Nash was saying akin to that at the last discussion of this, that it depends upon the kind of project. Single family looks like it generates more trips than low rise, which generates more trips than high rise. And then you get over to the commercial side. At this point, unless we're going to delay, and I'm fine with this, if we want to delay the ordinance longer to talk about that kind of an amendment, I'm inclined to withdraw the proposed amendment number 4 and leave it at 250. And if we, on all of this legislation, we amend it, we try it. If it doesn't work, we go back and tweak it again. So, you know, I actually would look to Dr. Nash. What is more appealing to you, having an array of different types of projects that trigger different thresholds, or would it be leave this alone and come back to fight another day? Because you're the one that's really going to have to use this, as you've pointed out to us numerous times. And if we're going to try to fix it, maybe we should try to fix it right. Here's a concept.
Sorry, my recommendation is that, it should be one number. The whole idea, as Alderman Savage did indicate, is to give us an idea of what we are going in for. I don't recommend that we have different thresholds for different land use. The bottom line is that they do produce vehicle trips. So if we go through it and look at this, we can also take a look at the average size of residential development in the city and also commercial, and say, okay, within Annapolis, on the average, most of the proposed developments are for single family units up to 50. So that you have some kind of historical record in addition to this table, which we did derive it from the IT trip generation manual, so to make a much more informed decision that we'll be more comfortable with.
That makes sense to me. I agree with you, Kwaku.
So where does that leave us? Because I'm getting lost.
Well, I heard you say that you would withdraw your 4th amendment.
Well, if the reason I said I would withdraw it is I don't think we have time to introduce an array of different types of developments with different triggers. Remember, all these are triggers. X number of trips triggers it, X number of accidents triggers it, X number.
Alderman, if I might finish my statement. I thought I've heard Dr. Dua and Dr. Nash say that they appreciate being consistent. And so that would speak to amendments that go over on page 3 also, correct?
Yep, and that's
so.
Yeah.
My question was going to be, what should we do with those amendments?
Well,
and I really think Dr. Dua's charts should be attached in some form or fashion as a template to be used, because it feels like we're targeting projects instead of setting some consistent standard.
No, we're not targeting projects. We're targeting trips, numbers of new trips.
But I understand that, but we are targeting projects and the trips that those projects will have. So,
well, Amendment 9 is a bit different. I'd suggest we wait till we get to that point, because that's a different section.
Okay, so are we withdrawing Amendment 4? Alderman?
I don't know, because I don't know what the alternative is. And you're suggesting that we include this table. I don't know how we would do that and how you would indicate use, because this table, the ones that Dr. Dua has introduced, are targeting, to use that word, different kinds of development: single family, low rise, and high rise, and commercial.
Well, can we deal with one, excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Can we deal with Amendment 4? If we eliminate Amendment 4, then it would restore 250. As the amendment says, strike that and add 50 there. So we're gonna, so that goes back to the original 250, right?
Can we just maybe table that Amendment 4 for the time being?
I would prefer that, because we're going to get into, with the very next amendment, some of the kinds of things, Madam Chair, that you, well, not the next one, but the one after that, that you talked about in terms of consistency between applicability and standards.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Dr. Dua, I can't see you.
In terms of attaching the table, it may not be necessary, because remember, the legislation generally talks about the latest ITE trip generation manual. They continue to conduct more studies across the country to come up with an average rate. So for instance, if we do have ITE trip generation manual, the 12th edition, some of these rates may be a little bit different. But we send it out as an illustration. And in fact, if you go back to what Alderman Savage said, based upon his extrapolation and given the size of developments here in the city, his idea of about 200 new vehicle trips, it kind of strikes the balance between not doing too many studies and also not making sure that the proposed development kind of go through the tracks without doing a full traffic impact study. So we can have it as a sample table, but if we have a new version of the ITE trip generation manual, the rate may change. So if we keep the language that we have to use the latest ITE trip generation manual, whatever that is available is what you will use to determine the rate for each proposed development.
So that may be a solution. The intent here was to trigger more traffic impact studies. In the interest of moving this along, I would be willing to amend Amendment 4 to say 200 trips, not 250, and then we can move on.
I'll second that.
Okay.
Okay, so there's a motion on the floor. Amendment 4 is to strike 250 and make it 200.
Right.
Further discussion, hearing none. All in favor, please say aye.
I didn't think we were ever going to be on before amendment number.
I know.
All right, the next one.
So, go ahead, Amendment 5.
Amendment 5 is to add the term in this trigger, so it's number of trips generated and so forth, or areas that are high pedestrian areas. And that may need some definition. I don't know whether Dr. Dewar or Dr. Nash have a intuitive notion of what that means, but the notion of the group that suggested this was that traffic is more of a problem where there's lots of pedestrians than it would be in areas where they're not. And I'm kind of thinking Forest Drive does not have a lot of pedestrians, but Bay Ridge Road does, and particularly school children. But that's the notion of that amendment, is that there are different circumstances in terms of traffic generation that should be taken into account.
Yeah, I would ask for a definition or a methodology. I'm not sure we have either of those to determine what are high pedestrian areas. I mean, I suspect it's downtown, but and that's basically from a study we did a few years ago looking at conflicts between vehicles and pedestrians downtown. But I would say a lot of times it's safer if there are a lot of pedestrians, cars are going slower because they're being careful. So if we're trying to get at a safety issue, then that metric might not be quite right. It's not necessarily where there's high pedestrians. It's an area where there aren't adequate pedestrian facilities or something along those lines. I don't know if Kwaku or I think Mike Johnson is also on the call if they have any ideas on that.
Well, I think that in terms of the pedestrian, if you are thinking of safe crossing by the pedestrians, then it has to relate to the safety component of that. Because when there are crashes or incidents, whether it's between two vehicles or more, or between a person and a vehicle, it's all recorded so you can see. And I don't know if the city has historical data in terms of which areas are considered to be high pedestrian areas. The other way to go around it is that there are some specific land uses that generate more walking trips. So if you want to take that one into account, then you may want to look at it. But however, it goes under the non-auto transportation set of criteria. So I'm not sure whether it is this is the place to put this one in, or to leave it under non-auto transportation, because non-auto basically includes walking, biking, and all other activities that do not involve motorized vehicle.
So I don't agree with that. I think that in this, when you look at number 2, we're talking about frequencies of accidents between automobiles, which has to do with intersections and congestions. This edition is talking about putting pedestrians in jeopardy. But I am sympathetic to what Dr. Nash says. I don't have a readily available definition for what is high pedestrian. I would certainly classify downtown on Main Street. I would think about some areas on Peninsula Eastport. There may be some areas over in Ward 2 around Growls or places like that. I'm trying to think possibly some places in Rhonda's ward. But I do not have a ready definition, and I'm not even sure if I did, I would be expert in it. So I guess I'll look to my colleagues on the committee. I saw Alderman Savage had his hand up.
Alderman, I'm going to take a privilege for a moment. I should have begun by asking this question for all of these. So what is it that we're trying to address here? Is this a public safety issue for pedestrians? what is it that we're trying to fix? Because I find it difficult to believe that others in other municipalities haven't dealt with this, and why we're reinventing the wheel, I don't understand. How do others address this? Other cities that are far more walkable with far more residents than we do, how is it addressed elsewhere?
So I don't have an answer for that, but I can tell you what the purpose is. Remember, this started life as not automotive transit, whatever the title of it is now. It started life as traffic impact analysis, and its whole point was to trigger traffic impact studies. Auto transit facilities has expanded the definition. And remember, that was not my druthers, that was the druthers of the then city manager to retitle this and redraft it, which I acquiesced to. But initially, way back when, starting with the traffic impact analysis study in the code as amended in 2016, I wanted to go back in with a couple of simple changes like Alderman Pfeiffer and Budge did with that, which had to do with increasing the number of traffic impact studies that would be generated. This has taken on a long and complicated life over the last 2 years. More people have gotten interested in this, so it's been a topic of discussion in things like the Forest Drive Eastport impact sector study, and has gotten interest from people that are looking at transportation issues from the impacts of development on communities. And this is one where it seemed to me that yes, traffic introduces public safety issues, and this is introducing the notion of where you have more pedestrians milling around, you may have more of a desire to dampen down the amount of traffic. It's as simple as that. That's the best explanation I can give for it.
Okay, well, I see a conflict. We are a city that wants to be a walkable city. And we want to be an urban area, which attracts people. At the same time, we need housing opportunity for people to live in. But then there's an effort, an interest of not having any more people come to our city or any more housing for our citizens. So it feels like we make it difficult to do what, and maybe I don't know what we're trying to do.
Well, I would say I don't accept that characterization, and that is not the intent of the legislation. The intent of the legislation is to understand the traffic impacts generated by a new development, and it's as simple as that. I agree with you that there is a tension between the desire to create affordable housing and the density that brings, and the impacts of that density on existing communities. And in fact, that's a lot of the thinking behind all of the adequate public facility legislation. But that's not the intent of this amendment. The intent of this amendment is simply to say, well, you have more people, that desirability of having more people walking around, you may want to look at the traffic impacts of having a lot of people on roadways where there's also a lot of traffic.
Alderman, you feel the way you do, and I feel the way I do. And I'm not going to say you're wrong, just like you can't say that I am. I am sure that the planning department has taken and does take into consideration traffic in all of the projects. Maybe not to the degree that some of us would like, but they do. So anyway, what are we doing with this amendment? We don't have a definition for high pedestrian areas. So are we going to define it? Or are we going to remove it? Alderwoman Tierney and then Alderman Savage.
Oh, thank you. Just a comment. I was Googling other cities and how they handle this, and it seems like we're trying to conflate standards with the code process, and we're sort of fumbling along developing these standards as we go. And I think the missing link, and I don't know if City Attorney Lyles is on here. Oh, hi. Is that this is not possible. I mean, it's going to be messy. That's the sense that I'm getting. We're making, not excuse the phrase, making it up as we go, but again, these other cities I'm looking at, they say the standards are here, and even if you want to reference them, but this is very uncomfortable.
So if I may directly comment to that.
Alderwoman Tierney and then Alderman Savage. There's an order.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Was Alderman Tierney, were you finished? I'm sorry, I felt like.
Oh, I was. I wanted Mr. Lyles to respond after Alderman Savage, perhaps. He raised his hand.
Okay, then I'm going to call, because I think he's responding to you. So I'm going to call on Alderman, City Attorney Lyles, and then I'll get to Alderman Savage.
He's good at rephrasing my questions.
The issue becomes, and where we are with some of the projects, is that normally when it comes to adequate public facilities, you look to the experts in the departments that you've hired to determine whether the framework that has been set up by the council has been met, or there has been a settlement or agreement as to how the development will meet the test, other than creating a particular kind of solution. As long as the agreement ameliorates the impact, and that's what the code allows. The problems we run into is no one seems to accept the experts in the departments when they say that this is adequate, or when they say that the developer has sat down with the department and agreed to a package of things that will ameliorate the impact. Even now, there is a Board of Appeals appeal on that very issue with respect to a particular project. And so at that point, the Board of Appeals under the code can sit in place of the experts at the planning department and make, its own decision with respect to whether or not the public facility is adequate, or the answer or the amelioration that has been developed is adequate. So that can be an issue, but I think this also the standards every 5 to 10 years have to be reviewed and reformulated for new ways of living. For instance, you bring in, 2 older parents and all the kids now live back home. That's just things have changed. And so you have to readjust your standards when you are talking about new developments. And every 10 years, you look at those standards, you list those, but the departments get to, I think, have some ability to say that the public test has been met, or the agreement has made the development passable because they've ameliorated the impacts in some way.
But then, can I add, the discussions that we're having now can be made during review of a respective project. Is that, the standards aren't cast in stone, that this still opens up discussion about other.
I'm sorry, I have to inject. We're not talking about the standards section yet. That is to come. We're talking about the applicability section. So I agree with you when we get to this discussion of the standards section, but we haven't even gotten there. Standard starts in the next section, 22-21050 standards. This is just what applies in terms of doing a traffic impact analysis. And it's a set of 3, this or this or this will trigger an impact analysis subject to the standards that show up on page 3. And that is where we can discuss the standards and the applicability or the judiciousness of the standards. But right now, we're just in what is the traffic impact analysis study? When is it applicable?
Right.
I'm sorry, Alderman Savage.
Good, thank you. Alderwoman Tierney, I think that's a really good point. Because just reading through this, again here. I think it's, so I understand the intention, which is to, correct me if I'm wrong, Alderman Arnett, but the intention is when a traffic impact analysis will be required when, I guess in this case, well, it doesn't really state clearly the when. I think the desire is to have it happen when a development is proposed near a high pedestrian area. But I think there'd be a, and I think, and to what Alderwoman Tierney said, I do think this is one good case, good point in terms of a situation where some of the details could certainly be worked out by staff in appropriate regulations or internal policy. Because I think, you know, just to propose some alternative language, at least just to express my point, is I think if we instead inserted a new number 2, a completely separate point that says something akin to, so a traffic impact study would be required when staff determines that the proposed development is near a high-use pedestrian area and may have an impact on those areas. So that would allow staff to determine on their own if a project is near a high-use area, pedestrian area, then they would be, and they think it would have an impact, they'd be able to require a traffic impact study. Because the way it's currently worded is any project that would go in near a high pedestrian area, which again, I guess is not defined yet, but even if it was defined, any project would necessarily need to comply with this that's near a high pedestrian area. Even if it's just a new single family or a new duplex or something. And I'm not sure if that's the level of detail or frequency of study you would want, Alderman Arnett. But I think you know, I'd be comfortable just allowing staff to do this, and then if we need to make adjustments, we can do that. But that would at least be, I think, an improvement over what is currently in the code.
So I guess if I can respond, I'm perfectly amenable to adding a new trigger number 2, which is traffic in high impact areas. I don't think that answers Dr. Nash's question about how do we define what we mean by high pedestrian areas. So, you know, I would be more than as a friendly amendment to create a new 2 and then have a 3 and a 4. But, you know, that I don't know whether there's a majority field towards that or not.
Well, I guess the question for Dr. Nash or Deputy Director Kwaku would be if we need to get more analysis before that definition is made, because at least if we were to simply open the door here for staff to make that definition, that standard on your own, you could take the time to get the metrics needed to really determine what's a good way to figure out what a high pedestrian use area is. Unless maybe you can just do it off the top of your head. I don't know, but what do you think about that approach?
Dr. Nash?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to develop some metrics, and then we would make a new code change, or this would refer to the metrics as determined by the department or something like that. Oh, okay.
Essentially, yeah.
Mom, whoever's doing that, please stop.
I think we can figure something out there.
So are we going to withdraw amendment, what is this, 5, and we will end up with an amendment 15 or whatever it is after Dr. Nash, Dr. Dubois come back with some tentative language or tentative language?
I could certainly send over placeholder language or just my draft language, or I don't know if Alderman Arnett has some of his language in mind, but I could certainly email you what I have.
Alderman Arnett, did I hear you say that you would accept that as a friendly amendment?
I did, but I didn't think that was the sense of what Dr. Nash was saying, so I'm getting a little confused here. I thought that the thrust of Alderman Savage's amendment was to create a new number 2 that has some language about high density pedestrian areas without a definition, and then we would make what is now number 2 number 3. And I agree, I'm acceptable to that. And Madam Chair, how we handle it is, make it a new amendment 15 and withdraw the current amendment 5. Again, totally flexible on that.
I think you could take numbers 2, 3, and 4 all get at is, maybe not 4, but 2 and 3 get at is something dangerous about the location of the development.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly.
So I think, and I'm not sure how it would be worded, but something about how the department should consider the particular context, including, high rate of pedestrians, locations of intersections within 150 feet, or, so it would say, and that would include these kinds of things that you would look at and include in your metrics for determining what a dangerous or a intersection of concern was.
So it almost sounds like what you're saying is that this clause that's being added to number 1 should actually be an amendment to number 2, because criteria number 2 is automobile accidents, but that would mean putting the pedestrian areas where there's a likelihood of danger.
Right. So 2 would be addressing some larger safety issues, including, pedestrian issues, including high frequency of accidents. And it could even, it might be easier to keep number 3 separate, but yes, I think that along those lines is,
so,
and then we can clarify exactly what that means in terms of, in terms of actual, how we determine what those areas are ahead of time.
Right.
Okay. Alderman Savage has sent us the language that he proposed. Is it possible that we could simply substitute the language that is in Amendment 5 for the Savage language?
It's fine with me, but now I'm thinking, did you want that as a separate 2, or do you want it folded in with the current 2, which has to do with automobile accidents or high pedestrian use areas?
I think a new 2.
Okay.
And
I accept that.
The one question, I guess, for the city attorney would be, if I typed staff, but I forgot to send it to you. I'm wondering if we should mention, instead of staff, just say planning and zoning or transportation department. Or do you think staff would be sufficient?
You want to say the department.
Okay.
The director of the department of whatever the department is, director of Department of Transportation or their designee.
Why don't you speak?
In terms of transportation, this idea of the pedestrian thing will require some data collection. Again, we have not addressed the issue of the definition, even if it is left to staff to make that. And my sense of the pedestrian issue here relates to safety, which the whole idea of the accident frequency comes in. I heard Alderman talking about auto accidents. My understanding of that section of the existing code does not actually relate to only auto accidents, but it relates to whether it involves pedestrians or not. That gives a clue. you may have a very high pedestrian, whatever that the definition is, area. And you may also have the necessary facilities to basically allow the pedestrians to use that one. And if the pedestrians are not obeying the traffic rules, you are going to have some kind of pedestrian vehicular crashes at that particular site. Again, the legislation also generally is under Planning and Zoning Department, which oversees this. So if you want to name a specific department, my recommendation is that we put it under one overall, and that particular department will have responsibility to coordinate with, in particular, Public Works and Transportation Department. Instead of trying to fragment who department is responsible for what, it comes under one, and that particular department has the responsibility to coordinate with that. Because, for instance, Public Works can do traffic counts, pedestrian counts at certain areas. In fact, nowadays we can use even some kind of surveillance to count how many people will pass through a specific crosswalk. So my recommendation is that if the proposed legislation is under Planning and Zoning, then Planning and Zoning should have responsibility, and then there will be a language where, when appropriate, P&Z will coordinate with the department that to look at, say, safety or whatever. For instance, safety, we look at State Highway Administration safety data. The city doesn't carry that. Even for the police department, it's kind of records here and there. If you want to get official safety data, you have to go to SHA. But it's not in the legislation, but we know that so far as safety is mentioned, that is the best source to get the safety data to analyze for any particular development that will be proposed in the specific geographic area.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. I think whenever we talk about actions by departments, it's better to say the director, because the director is the one that's imbued with charter authority to do these things. So it's the director of the department that has the authority. They can delegate it to whomever they want to delegate it to.
Okay.
That's a kind of a stylistic thing, which we'll correct. So when we talk about department, it'll be the director of the Department of Planning and Zoning or director of the Department of Transportation. So
I think the Department of Planning and Zoning is clearly the one that has purview here. Who they consult, that's their business. But I'm trying to figure out how all of that discussion relates to this particular amendment that Alderman Savage has offered, and I certainly am willing to accept as a friendly amendment. In the code right now, planning and zoning are the ones that do and have always been the ones doing this. Who they consult is their professional business, but I think they're the ones that have the lead on this, the control.
Madam Chair, may I just summarize and move the new amendment?
Yes, I'm reading, I think, the new amendment, or when Planning and Zoning or Transportation Department or their designees.
Yeah, just, I guess, changing it, revising it based on the city attorney and Kwaku's recommendations would be a number 2, quote, quote, when the director of planning and zoning determines that the proposed project is near a high-use pedestrian area and may have an impact on those areas.
Okay, Ms. Green, did you get that? Do you have it in front of you?
I'll send it to you.
Do you have it?
Yeah, if you could
Yes,
send it,
but I need
send it on, Alderman.
The page and the line number, please.
Oh.
So this would go on line 38, right?
Page 2, line 38.
9.
So 39. Yeah.
Kick
Go
down
after the
2.
or. So yeah. It's
38.
So it's a replacement for amendment number 5, and it would go. It is the new line 39 and new number 2.
I think it would be 38. Everything would move up.
Okay.
I mean, we're deleting or high pedestrian area, so. But it would be, yeah, so then we'd renumber.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
Yes, I'm sorry, Alderwoman Tierney.
Oh, no problem. I know that Alderman Arnett worked enormously on this, and I just want to speak in the abstract a little bit. And Alderman Savage, this is the right, I believe this is the right way to do it, because the more emphasis you prefer, it's like in my background, we call this like a performance spec, and it's an opportunity for the council to say, what do we care about? So in the code, you should focus on this. You should focus on, we care about pedestrian safety, we care about this, we care about that, and the more that we refer to the experts as for the standards and the guidelines, then we can springboard off of that. But if we put in the code what we really care about, we always have the opportunity to say, it's still not safe enough. I think, I don't know if that's legally correct, but that would be my objective, is the focus is to put in the code our priorities and let the standards be the benchmark from the department heads. So thank you, Rob.
Okay. So do we have the language now? We're creating a new 2, and I've taken it down, but do we all have the language? So are we ready to vote on the new Amendment 5, is it?
Yes, I am.
Okay. All in favor of Amendment 5, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Amendment 6.
All right, that's on line 40, right? We're all on the same line. All right, and so this one was hearkening to exactly the same kinds of things we were talking about earlier in terms of making the applicability consistent with the standards. So in the standards, we talk about a distance of 1/4 mile. So I substituted here for the frequency of accidents within 1/4 mile. So that again, remember, this section on applicability is simply a trigger for when you're doing an impact analysis study. The next section is the standards that you use for that traffic impact analysis.
Alderman, what was there prior to you inserting the order?
150 feet.
Okay, so you've lengthened the distance.
Yeah, so if you go to page 3 under standards, under the first, under number 1 in standards, you can see there, it talks about 1/4 mile. In the next one, where there's more trips, it talks about 1/2 mile. And so to me, it seemed that the applicability distances should be consistent with the standard distances. And I chose the shorter. There was a 1/4 mile and 1/2 mile. I thought 1/2 mile was getting pretty far afield from the project, so I simply took the 1/2 mile.
1/4 mile.
1/4 mile, I mean.
So are you moving Amendment 6?
Yes, please.
Second.
Okay. Further discussion? Dr. Nash?
I'm sorry, this is number 4, right?
No.
Number 6.
Number
I mean,
6.
on page 3, line 3?
No. It's on page 2, line 40.
Oh, okay, sorry. Continue on.
Thank you. This is confusing. All right. Well, gee, that was fast. All right. So now on page 3.
Right, we need to vote on that one.
Oh, I thought we had.
Yeah, we haven't voted on it.
Okay.
Further discussion? Okay, hearing none. All in favor of amendment, 5?
Oh, wait,
6.
can I
6.
also just say, we also have the issue of determining what high frequency of accidents is, but so I'm not sure if we need any of the language that Alderman Savage just worked on to apply to this too, for us to be able to determine a threshold for high frequency of accidents.
So high frequency of accidents has always been in the code.
I know, and I've never known what it means.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, we were relying on you to know what it means.
So can I ask a question about that, Madam Chair?
Yes.
I guess this might also be to the city attorney. So the way the current code says, it does use that language, high traffic accident frequency, but it says, so a project must have an impact study if there are current traffic problems or issues in the project area, e.g. high traffic accident frequency. Now, is that a term that we have to define in the code, or is that something that staff can do, or is it common knowledge applies?
You had staff tell you they don't know what it means, so you have to define it, or somebody has to be defined somewhere.
But how have they've been using a standard up until this point for that?
Yeah, they've probably been ignoring it as well. They don't
I've just used it to apply to any project near Forest Drive. Because I know from a study the county did that there are some intersections there where we have high crash rates. But I don't really know how it applies to the rest of the city. And so I could use some guidance on that.
Well, to Alderwoman Tierney's point, I'm not sure. I don't know if we could necessarily do that as the council, that because we don't know much about the safety. But I think we'd have to get a recommendation from what the police, I guess, and transportation department themselves about.
Right. Well, I can do it like we talked about for the pedestrian.
And the other issue is a blanket statement about frequency of accidents may not relate to the traffic impact studies, because accidents occur for a lot of different reasons. So you've got to figure out, are we talking about people driving drunk, which is, despite what you may do, you can make it the safest street in the world, but if people driving drunk, you're gonna have certain types of accidents. Are the light patterns off? You know, there are a lot of different reasons why accidents happen. I think being this detailed in the code, you know, without a definition is problematic, in my view.
So we do have counts of in the city and in the county for intersections that have a high number of accidents. I remember seeing something that showed the top 10 intersections for accidents, and I think most of them, a majority of them, were on Forest Drive. I don't have those statistics, but I had always thought that was the kind of thing that the staff looked at in terms of looking at a project that is near one of those areas that tend to have a lot of accidents.
Well, I think that, and the transportation folks can answer this better, but in my experience, it's been the grade of the street from the standpoint of this traffic flowing properly, rather than maybe just the accidents. That's just one factor. But you've got also in the legislation or in the code, this grade, you know, A, B, C, D, which is more understandable, I think, across different disciplines.
Dr. Dua?
I believe the state has a methodology for what they call calculating the rate of accident, where it takes into account traffic volumes. As the city attorney did indicate, you can have the safest possibly designed road, yet people may be speeding or drunk or whatever, and that could lead to accidents. So if you're looking at this, my recommendation is that, I don't recall the methodology, but when I was with the city of Bowie, that was one thing that we worked on to determine which areas kind of have safety issues with respect to traffic. And we may want to look at what the state has, the state standards and methodology, and then we can apply it here. I don't know whether the public works director has experiences in that. I believe you have, and maybe does some calculations to determine, especially on the state side, what is considered to be higher accident section or area of the road.
Generally, pedestrian counts are not really captured well by cities for the myriad of intersections that they have. And I agree with Attorney Lyles that really being too specific, I don't think is necessarily the best way to approach it. During the traffic impact study phase, the police reports for specific intersections would capture details on the accidents, because it could be a drunk driver, it could be something that is indicating some other structural problem with the thoroughfare, or a signal or something like that, and that's how you would sort of develop your mitigation strategy. And I don't think that I don't know of any entity or agency that has detailed records on pedestrian, on that granular level for pedestrian accidents. You could make some general inferences that if it's a congested area, that there are more pedestrians. If it's a denser area in terms of dwelling, there should be more pedestrians. But I think the police reports pulled during the study phase would be the best way to approach it. And the legislation may not need to be as specific regarding that.
So are you saying that we should include specifically here as defined by the police department? Or who would be if we kept this in, who would determine whether it's accident prone for traffic?
Well, the engineer, I'm sorry, finish what you're saying. I think the engineer performing the traffic impact study would determine that based on the data, the specifications for the study would dictate what sorts of information that should be included in it. And then based on that, given that they are a bona fide expert, they would then be able to determine the danger associated with, the area of study. What is the risk to pedestrians or youth?
So it sounds like that's not to be determined until after the traffic study is completed.
Correct. I think that's the right point at which you determine. A priori, it's difficult. You're making projections and the models, you're sort of using like to make like a parallel. It's like an econometric model trying to predict how the economy will perform. If you captured all the variables, you would be able to do it, but capturing it is not really practical. So your models have a high degree of uncertainty. So the modeling approach would not be very accurate. But what is most accurate is the historical record of what has occurred. So you can actually see whether this is, have there been fatalities here? Have there been, orthogonal collisions or like T-bones or something like that, which might indicate that there's something that needs to be looked at more carefully in that intersection. Maybe there's sight distance problems, maybe there's signal conflict, something is wrong. And that's how the study would sort of give real actionable information, as opposed to a model which, models are useful, but they're all wrong. I think some smart person said that somewhere, right? Yeah.
Thank you. Alderman Savage.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And I guess this also might be a question for the primary sponsor on this. I guess, do we want this to be a standard, perhaps, and not a trigger? Because, again, the way this is worded, it would trigger any project, no matter the size, to have to consider, as if there's a concern about traffic safety, that they would have to do a full traffic study. And I'm not sure if that's the intent, or if we just have that be in the standards, is when the previous standards, the 200 trips apply, then those projects have to look at the nearby intersection to see if there are any frequency of accidents or other issues that need to be addressed.
Yeah.
So
I think, Ms. Alderman, could you let City Attorney?
Oh, I thought he was asking me.
Never mind. Okay, sorry, Alderman, go ahead.
So this is since 2006 when this code was first introduced. This has been in there. And again, the applicability section, if you read the very beginning, notwithstanding other provisions of this title, a traffic impact analysis shall be required when 1 or 2 or 3. And 1 was the number of trips generated. 2 was the accident in the area of the intended project. And 3 was problems with entrance and exit in and out of the project near other entrances and exits. I don't know how often 3 has ever been a trigger, but you can see where if you're trying to put one project on top of another project, there's going to be problems with people being able to get in and out of the new project if there's an existing project right there. And again, I have no idea, but all of these 3 triggers, or 4 now, are to try to get us to the next section where the standards are, and where it seems to me standards are where definitions are probably more likely. But again, all I was attempting to do with this particular amendment was to marry up the parameters from the standard section, the distances, with the trigger section. You know, how many automobile accidents are there within X amount of radius of this proposed new project? As far as the standards, I had always understood that it was based on police reports and other kinds of things. We do know in the city, the intersections and the areas, the roadway areas that tend to generate more traffic because of issues like speeding or sight lines or lack of shoulders or whatever.
So the question becomes, do we keep this in under applicability, or should it be moved to standards? Now,
it is in standards also.
Okay, well then delete it from applicability. No. And only addressed in standards. And what I'm hearing is that is measured by the traffic study. So we are gonna use it prior to the traffic study, when the traffic study is gonna deliver that information to us?
The applicability, again, is the trigger for a traffic study. And the triggers are the number of new trips generated, the number of accidents in the area, and the relationship of the entrance and exit of this project to existing projects, existing conditions. Those are the 3 triggers. Now we have the 4th one that is the new Amendment 5, which has to do with high pedestrian areas. All of that simply gets you to, you're doing a traffic impact analysis study. Then you turn to the standards section, where the standards define kinds of things that are considered in the traffic impact. And when you look at the standards section, you'll see that has some variables in terms of the number of trips generated, lower number of trips, shorter distance, higher number of trips, higher distance, all of those things that start to happen on page 3.
Alderman, I understand all of those things. I think we all do. My question is, what are we doing with this amendment? Let me just, Alderman Savage, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to ask a question to help kind of push this along. So, Alderman Arnett, I guess the question would be what type of project you would want to have to do a traffic study, because I mean, personally, I'm more interested in the larger ones to make sure that they have to do a traffic study, because the smaller ones I don't think are going to have much of an impact, especially based on looking at Kwaku's charts. So if we don't need to worry about the small ones, then I think moving this to the standards section would be sufficient, unless you wanted to capture it, because where it currently is in the applicability section, it is going to require even smaller projects. Like even if you get like a duplex or 4 new units on whatever Chesapeake Avenue, then they'd have to do a full traffic study, even though they don't meet the 250 trip or 200 trip limit that we're trying to change it to. I don't know if that's your intention or not.
It is. So you touched on a good point. 10 small projects can generate as much traffic collectively as one big. And so that is why that was the intent on lowering the number of trips that would trigger it, because it would pull in more small projects. So the overall goal is the traffic impacts. And it doesn't make any difference whether it comes from 10 small projects or one big project. Traffic has now been significantly increased. So I think the answer to your question is I think small projects do matter collectively.
Dr. Nash?
I am afraid to say this, but I think that's one reason why I would really like you as council to consider impact fees for new developments, because then smaller projects, maybe they don't do a traffic study, but they're still paying some certain amount into a fund where we can pull that money together to do road improvements. So just wanted to mention that.
I totally agree with that, but that's different legislation.
Can I ask another question for Dr. Nash?
Yeah, Alderman Savage.
Is there another, Dr. Nash, is there, or to Deputy Transportation, is there a way to kind of address this in these smaller projects? Is there a way to ensure some of these smaller projects don't come in, they can come in individually, but if somebody, for example, wants to, on Chesapeake Avenue, or I'm going to pick on Eastport, wants to put in a bunch of quadplexes or something, smaller multifamily homes, which individually would not trigger a traffic study, is there something we can do to say, basically to make sure that collectively they may have an impact on traffic, but they also may have an impact on the safety of an intersection? Is there a way we can kind of catch those, or is there a process currently? Did you have any suggestions along those lines?
We don't catch those smaller projects impacts at the time that we look at it. But if a larger project comes in and it meets the requirement, planning and zoning give them all approved developments, whether they have been constructed or not, and irrespective of the size. So the idea is that in the long run, somebody may have to pay for the full impact, which is not fair. That is where the impact fees come in. What I have seen in other jurisdictions, they do have impact fee table based upon the scope and the size of the development. So you look at that. So whether you are small and you don't meet the threshold for traffic impact study, you do contribute to future improvements in the area when a bigger development comes in and the person or that proposed development is subject to traffic impacts, and we see that there is a need for more mitigation measures to improve that. We don't want to put the whole cost on the perhaps relatively large development that came in maybe 2 or 3 years later. But if we do have the impact table, then we do collect the money, and then we can use that one to alleviate the full cost of the mitigation measures that will be carried out by the large developer that comes in. So we may want to look into that. And I think Sally and her staff has several experiences in terms of mitigation tables and how much impact fees and how much they have to be calculated. And that could be done by the planning and zoning, and we can also help through research and other jurisdiction. Of course, the size of the city is also important. Because remember, if you go to certain areas like Philadelphia, you may be able to get away with so many things. But in Annapolis, every small development in the end makes a significant contribution to the traffic conditions on our roads.
But I guess one concern to that is that and I think that's sound, but I think it assumes that there can always be improvements made on those roadways, because that's what you would be capturing the impact fees for, is to make improvements to mitigate the impact. But some of our roadways may be constrained by just width or other improvement based on the historic nature or nature of peninsulas. There aren't always improvements you can make. So
you can't always add a lane, but you can usually do something, whether it's improve the sidewalk, which would incentivize people walking. Is it refresh crosswalk painting, to make it safer for pedestrians? There's other things you could do to make the overall level of service, not just for vehicles, but for all modes, work better on that roadway. So there's that option. I mean, we could also just ask the police department every year, make us a map of the 5 most dangerous intersections and do it that way. Or we could rely on our site design, which is really what we do now for the smaller projects. Smaller projects that are going through site design still get reviewed by Public Works, still get reviewed by Transportation and current planning. And they often make comments about safety issues around the sight lines, turning issues. Right now, Public Works has made some comments about our Primrose School application we have in. It needs a traffic study, hasn't had its traffic study yet, but Public Works has already made some comments about the safety of the site entrance. So there's that.
But I would argue the specific answer to your question, Rob, how do you pull in the smaller projects, is go back up to line 32 and lower the number of trips generated. That's how you pull in more smaller projects. And that was the intent of lowering that number down to 50, was it would draw in the small projects, which were the cumulative. But I understand the argument from the director that would mean we'd be doing nothing but traffic impact analysis and that there isn't enough staff time. That's why we compromised, put that back up to 200 based on Dr. Dua's tables. But that is how you draw it. And it could well be a death by 1,000 cuts. You have innumerable number of small projects that cumulatively add up to a big traffic burden, big traffic impact. Or you can have one big one, and both of them result in traffic, and in traffic that may need to have traffic impact fees. I agree with that.
Mr. Lyles had his hand up.
Yeah, I just need to check on staff because it's 2 hours and 11 minutes. And we're into overtime work on my end, my staff's end. So I just need to see if we still have tech available and if Takia's okay. Takia, you okay?
I just got a text that we had to have a hard stop at 5:15.
Okay, good. All right.
3 minutes.
I knew it was coming.
I just got, it came 15 minutes ago. I'm sorry I didn't see it. So,
okay. All right, no problem.
But sorry.
Oh no, can't we keep going?
Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Alderman. I agree with what Alderman Ross Arnett is saying. In that the size of the traffic study is predicated on is very strongly correlated to the size of the development, and that's a way in which you don't sort of have death by 1,000 cuts, like that way of putting it. Because if you have a smaller development, you might require the developer to just study, one intersection. You have to sort of specify what the size of his or her study is. But it gives us, it then always gives us a contemporaneous sense of what is occurring at the intersection. even in the aggregate, even though the mega projects have a more immediate impact, a more noticeable impact, every project, every form of development that adds trips is going to have an impact on intersections. So really it's a matter of determining the threshold of the size. Like a very complex study does require a lot of staff time or consultant expertise to analyze it, but a small study does not. And it's often something that you would have different standards for what should be included in, say, a smaller study than in sort of one that's looking at 6 intersections, where you have to maybe do more sophisticated modeling and things of that nature. So
the bulk of the expense is the intersections counts. So if the fewer intersections, you're counting the turning movements for the less expensive traffic study.
Right.
Because right now our traffic studies tend to be about $15,000 and include probably around 6 intersections, in that ballpark.
And that is not necessary. If I'm building like 20 homes or something like that, I don't think you need to study 6 intersections for that. If I'm building like a shopping mall or 250, 300 homes, yes, you probably would need a study of that size, of that scope, because your number of trips that you're attracting or generating is going to impact more intersections.
Well, I think we're going to have to let Mr. Johnson have the last word.
Okay, well, thank you. I seldom get that pleasure.
Well, congratulations. I don't hear a resolution for Amendment 6, so we're going to have to stop without taking, unless you gentlemen are ready to vote on Amendment 6. But we are at 5:15 right now. So I guess we're going to have to put this on the agenda for the next regularly scheduled Rules Committee.
We'll do it.
Okay. Thank you, everyone who participated. I appreciate it, and who stayed, Ellie. And committee members, good job. We got through, 3 amendments today? Oh, just 2. Oh, well. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll move that we adjourn.
Second.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All in favor, thank you.
Aye.
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 All right, be safe. Thank you.